compared to the highest earners in Harris County, which happen to be white men, which is not the same as the highest earners in Texas, which are Asian men. So in Harris County, it's white men, and white women make 70 cents on the dollar compared to white men. So that's lower than 80 cents. And black women make 45 cents on the dollar, and Hispanic women make 38 cents on the dollar in our county. So that's overall.
Today's innovation conversation is going to be with Stacey Latoyson, founder and CEO of Dream Big Ventures. Stacey Latoyson is the founding partner and a venture capitalist and leader in innovation and strategy. Stacey leverages her 22-year energy industry experience with Chevron, which includes expatriate assignments in China and Angola. Stacey is a native Houstonian and first-generation college graduate, earning her Bachelor of Science degree from the University of Houston, go Cougs, and MBA from the University of St. Thomas. Stacey established Dream Big Ventures in 2022 after completing Columbia Business School's Venture Capital and Private Equity program, where she currently serves as a global ambassador. Stacey is a limited partner in Mendoza Ventures portfolio, Soft Tech Venture Fund, and Urban Capital Network, and her investments include Agility Bank, a woman and minority-owned bank here in Houston, Texas. Stacey has tapped into the emerging Houston innovation ecosystem with a steadfast commitment to increasing awareness and opportunities for women and other underrepresented groups in our community. It is my pleasure, and I ask for you to welcome me or join me in welcoming Stacey to the stage, guys.
Thank you so much for that very kind introduction, Lakeem Jackson, and the Greater Houston Partnership. It is such an honor to be here today and to receive this invitation to share about innovation and how we can close this gap that we have in equity for women and underrepresented groups. So, hi. I don't know how many of you went to South by Southwest. Anybody in the room? Yes, and it was incredible. So I'm still recovering a little bit. Greater Houston Partnership actually had a house there. So hopefully next year you get a chance to travel to Austin and check it out. It was pretty cool. So yes, as he said, I'm a native Houstonian, Stacey Latoyson. I'm Puerto Rican and Cuban, and worked for 22 years in the energy industry, actually for one of the major partners here. Had these really amazing assignments overseas, and worked really hard, met some really great people, and learned some amazing skills. But I decided during the pandemic that, as you know, maybe many of you can feel the same way, I decided to make a pivot. And I was actually inspired after attending a women's executive conference where Serena Williams was the keynote speaker. And she talked about Serena Ventures, which she formed because there's only 2% of venture capital funds that are allocated to women and underrepresented founders. And so when I heard that, I was instantly inspired because I have a lot of tools in my toolbox over the years that translate into venture capital. So yes, I started Dream Big in 2022, and whatever I do, I go for it full force. So started off making a few investments, especially in women funds, women-led funds and founders. So I am a limited partner in Portfolio, and where women investors invest in women founders. So it actually takes that type of intentionality in order to make a change. I'm also, as he said, a limited partner in Mendoza Ventures, and they just raised a $100 million fund out of Boston. and with the anchor of Bank of America. And I'm super excited that I'm going to be hosting them here in Houston on April 19th at the Ion, so that we can provide the community with great information about what it takes to raise a fund, and as underrepresented groups, the challenges and how we can overcome them. And so the theme of that talk is leveling the playing field. So and just last week on Thursday, I hosted another event at the Ion called Energizing Latino Investors, and I hosted David Olivencia, who's the CEO of Angeles Investors, where I'm also a member, and we also focus on investing in Latino founders. So just wanted to share with you some of the gaps in the current landscape that we have that exists specifically for women. And has anybody here in this audience felt at times where you were denied or passed over for a great opportunity in favor of a male counterpart when you knew you were equally as qualified or more so? Yes. Has anybody been paid less than a male counterpart for the same role?
Don't be bashful.
And have you ever been denied access to a decision-making input at your company? Or told that you weren't ready to lead with no clear answer of why? So, unfortunately, this is something that too many of us face. And, many of us are mothers, or some of you have, some of the males in here, you have a wife or a partner, you have daughters. And so I know I have a 10-year-old daughter, and she's the future. So the numbers are just atrocious. And right now, I think the United Nations, they actually have a report that says it's going to take at least almost 300 years before we reach the pay equity gap, before we close that gap. So we've got to do something about it now. I don't want my daughter, Sophia, having to feel like she's not valued, or to be working super hard and feel like it doesn't matter how hard you work, she's still not going to earn the same amount of money as her male counterpart. So we've all got to work together to close this gap and to come up with solutions, real tangible actions to make a change. So one thing that I'm super excited about, and you all were unaware of, is I invited the professor, U of H professor, Dr. Gregory, here today. I serve on the board at U of H's College of Liberal Arts and Social Sciences, the Dean's Advisory Board. And in that, we have the Center of Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies. And Professor Gregory has a whole research team that has statistics that will really add a lot of value to this conversation. So I'm, very honored that she accepted my invitation to join us today to provide some, information on some of the research that her and her team have conducted. So please give a warm welcome applause. Any other cougs in the house? Whose house? We're number one.
Thanks. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, so U of H has an annual table talk luncheon, which this was my first year participating as a board member. I got a table, and it was some of the most intriguing conversations at that table. I had the president of United Way at my table. She's a woman and CEO, And, one of the things that she said was a mentor of hers, and he was a male ally, told her, I see you being a CEO one day. And it was just hearing those words inspired her to make it happen. So, we can encourage each other and inspire each other and be a voice for people who aren't being heard, and the opportunities are limitless when we do that.
This is true. I was talking to somebody earlier today about the role of aspirations in parenting. If parents have aspirations for their children because they believe that it's possible that they may succeed, they are more likely to enact those because they'll work harder to pursue those. But then the question is, well, why do some people not have aspirations? Why are they so depressed? They don't believe that the system will work for them. It's not to blame people who don't have aspirations, but just understanding that the dynamic of aspirations, or of, as you say, having somebody model the possibility for you, that you too could follow that path, is huge. And it's true across all children, right? People have to, and then it's true for us as adults too, as we look for what kind of possibilities we might have in the framework. And I think one of the dynamics that sometimes muddies the conversation is we have this feeling that there's a discussion about equity, there's a discussion about equity across gender, race, ethnicity, a lot of different factors, but there's an underlying feeling among the population sometimes that equity for you means loss for me. So then you have a certain kind of sense of, oh, well, is this really what we want to work toward? And I think it's important to sort of emphasize that, as you're pointing out, all these investments in new ventures and things like that open up new markets. If people have more money, they spend more money. So equity actually grows the pie. I think that's a message that hasn't gotten out as much as it should do, and that where you're investing in people, and both in terms of their wages and in terms of their businesses, you're opening up possibilities for markets as well as new perspectives. You bring people in to a market or a new industry, and they'll see new opportunities that somebody from a different perspective wouldn't necessarily see. So those opportunities can then intersect, and go in all different directions that people can't predict. But just opening up the possibility for imagination, I think, is key.
Yes. So my daughter, Sophia, I tell her every day, and she has a T-shirt that says it too, future leader. And she just wears it so proudly. And just recently they had Catholic Schools Week at school, and they asked them to dress up as a superhero. And she decided to wear a business suit because she said, my mommy is my superhero.
So my 18-year-old Sophie wears one that says sarcasm. So just wait. Give her another 8 years. So anyway, they're very sweet when they're
Yes. So I know you were recently featured on KHOU 11 on the news to discuss the gender gap, the gender pay gap. So can you share a little bit of what you found in your research?
Well, there was some bad news for Harris County. Nationally, the general numbers are that women are making about 80 cents on the dollar, or 80% of what men make. That's across industry, so it's not really looking one-to-one on like people in the same job, but just what people are making overall. And that's related to all kinds of issues, like people get tracked into certain lower paid professions, or this is just full-time workers. It doesn't take into consideration part-time workers, which a lot of females end up in those roles because of the issues around childcare, because this is a question I've asked ever since I had my first child. Why does school close at 3:30? It doesn't make any sense. Who invented that? Not to say that we don't have some other issues around schools, but this is like a huge problem for parents. And, we actually calculated it. And during the time that people are at work at a full-time job, your child is in school, public school, starts at 5, potentially 4 years old. So that's 4-year gap. Nothing in the summer, and closes at 3:30 after school. 37% of the working hours. So you're responsible for that other, what is it, 63%? Yes, math. That's just a shocking number, isn't it, when you hear that? But then I say that to people and they say, well, that's shocking, but then when I think about it, I realize I spend half my time trying to figure out where to put my children while I'm at work, right? And there just hasn't been a family infrastructure built to support women. And that's why so many people either step out or go part-time or have all these issues. And then that affects the way their wages grow over time, because if you step out, then there's this perception that you're not dedicated worker, you're not reliable, like women are going to be seen as less reliable workers. So that's going to affect their overall salary. But in Houston, it's also 80-80, but because the oil and gas industry is so much
male dominated.
There you
yes,
go.
That's the industry that I came from.
So you experience this.
Yes.
And it also is largely Caucasian in that dynamic. Mm-hmm. So when you look not just at the wages of men compared to women, but you break it out by race, ethnicity, as well as gender, compared to the highest earners in Harris County, which happen to be white men, which is not the same as the highest earners in Texas, which are Asian men. So in Harris County, it's white men, and white women make 70 cents on the dollar compared to white men. So that's lower than 80 cents. And black women make 45 cents on the dollar, and Hispanic women make 38 cents on the dollar in our county. So that's overall, right? So that links to education level, links to a lot of different factors. But you do have a sort of skewed economy here because of the special signature industry of oil and gas, which is largely white men. 22% is the industry with the lowest gender ratio. So that's a place where we could improve. So that's an opportunity, you might say, here in our county to bring in new perspectives and grow through those insights. So that you can look at it as a problem, or you can look at it as an opportunity for growth, right? So there's one right there. So there's room to learn from this data, and then to act on it, and to think, how do we take advantage of the untapped talent that's here in our region.
Sue, thank you for sharing your research, and it's just, it's sad. It's sad, and we've got to do something about this, especially women of color. So can you tell us, what are some maybe case studies that you've seen along with your research where they've actually been able to make a change and make an impact and close some of that gap?
So
have you seen anything?
Today, I came from a lunch with the First Lady of Iceland, interestingly, who has just written a book about Iceland, which is the country in which there's the smallest gender wage gap. Now, Iceland also happens to have 300,000 people in it, in the country. So that's, it's a small set, and everybody knows everybody else practically. So that's a completely anomalous set. But they even have a word which she uses in the title, which I'll skew, something like sprakar, for extraordinary women. Special word. So she talks about how they were the first nation to have a democratically elected woman leader. They have a history of naming people so-and-so's daughter as well as so-and-so's son. So, they have a different focus, though it's still the father's name. So, it's still got a gender skew. But anyway, so there are models of entities, or civic entities, where women are increasingly present in policymaking roles, and I think that's key. I mean, here in the United States, we are also made progress. We're now, I believe, at 28% of Congress is female, whereas in 1992 it was 6%. So it was 0 in 1920 when suffrage passed, and it took about 70 years to 92 to get to 6%. That's really a long time, but there's a whole cultural change that's going to shift. So then since 92 to now, that's 30 years, isn't it? Yeah. That's a big jump in that time, right? So it's like tripled, more than quadrupled, right? So from 6 to 28. So that's a big change. And the more people you have in the room, it's not really an issue. There are plenty of men who support things like childcare, and Joe Biden was pushing that agenda for a while, and it almost got there, right? That was that effort to make sliding scale childcare available nationally. And the dynamic around that I don't think got discussed as much as it could do, is that not only does that provide childcare to the parents in that way, but it also provides huge numbers of well-paid jobs, right? And all that money goes into your economy. Those people are spending money, and they're likely to actually spend it, not put it in the bank, right? So that's a way that some of these things haven't maybe been emphasized in terms of what an injection of cash into the economy, that kind of a transformation would be. I could go on, but.
Well, thank you for sharing a few examples. And one of Greater Houston Partnership's goals and mission is to attract economic growth and development here in Houston and attract businesses and families. And so, closing this wage gap could definitely improve our reputation and definitely attract talent and attract businesses here. You agree?
Totally. It's all about workforce,
Yes.
AKA consumers.
So I had a couple of ideas and wanted to even poll the audience, see if maybe all of you can, help to brainstorm, because one advantage that the Greater Houston Partnership has is the collaboration and partnerships with all of the companies and the universities here. And so that's pretty powerful. And, I attended the annual meeting, my first one, and there was over 400 people, 1,200 people there. The room was packed with powerhouse people and influential figures here in the city that can influence and improve and make big decisions. So, could we put a task force together that looks specifically at which companies are putting in policies and taking action to close this gender pay gap at their corporation?
Well, actually, another thing that has changed recently is that Houston City and Harris County, the county, have both initiated commissions on women. And I'm on the city commission on women, and there's also one that's just started at the county, and they would love to work with GHP on exactly that kind of issue, because it's an opportunity to sort of collaborate across whatever entities want to be part of the discussion. I think it's just an opportunity to have a conversation.
Yes, because GHP has a whole economy team that puts index reports out on, the real estate and the state of the economy and, how much have we grown. And so I don't know if there's one yet on gender pay gap, but I definitely will submit that recommendation. And maybe we can even recognize the companies at the annual meeting who are making progress on their gender pay gap.
Yeah, great idea.
So I wanted to ask you because this forum is talking about innovation, right? And so at Dream Big Ventures, I'm taking action to invest in women and underrepresented founders and in new and innovative ideas that are going to shape our future. Do you have can you think of a disruptive idea that is going to close this gap? So it won't take 300 years for my daughter and yours and everybody else's to have a leveling playing field and equal pay in the workforce.
Well, this is a hugely disruptive idea, but it's not new. Childcare. It's pretty simple. I coined a new name for it. I call it school work synchrony. Just make the work day match the school day, and you don't have to make it required. So school could let out at 3 o'clock. So if you want your kids to go home at 3, sure. But I know many people who can afford it who pay for childcare from 3 months to 5 years, and then they pay for aftercare. So that when they get home, their kids have done their homework, they've done some sports, they played with their friends. They just stay at school, and some other teachers come in and take care of them for the time between 3:30 and 5 or 6. And then the family, you get home and people are more relaxed because the homework's done, and it's not a stressful environment. So, but those are people who pay for it, right? So people who can't afford to pay for it may win a spot in the golf course workforce board's subsidy, but those are very limited, and aftercare is expensive at most schools, and many schools don't even offer it because they know that the parents are not going to be able to do that. So if you just expanded the school day, thought of it as public education starting at 3 months old, and offered to everybody the same services that the well-to-do buy for themselves, then you would do a lot to expand the way women could participate.
Actually, I have a perfect example of that. When I was an expat in China for 5 years, and then in Angola, I was like, this is a single mother's dream. I had a nanny and housekeeper, and she also walked the dog during the day. She made breakfast for my daughter. She made me lunch. She was there to cook dinner every day. The house was clean. All I had to do was focus on work. So I guess this is probably what most of the men, what it feels like. I was like, oh my gosh, and yet we rarely get that opportunity. I was the only single mother there, but I was like, wow, it was just so much off of my plate where I could just focus on work and not have to juggle like so many other things that we do every day. So I definitely agree with that one. And I have to commend the United Way of Greater Houston. Amanda McMillian said that they're offering scholarships now to mothers for childcare, to try to help improve that. So, it'd be great if more companies implemented the same thing.
Or if they didn't want to do it themselves, just advocated for having it be more of a widespread civic policy, because that's one of the problems where sometimes businesses have started it, but then if you move from one business to another, your child loses their connection. So that didn't historically work so well. So if you want to have a transferable system where people can either stay where they are while their parents are elsewhere, or they can. So but what about, there's also some people who don't have kids, and how can we help those women? Because there's still a pay gap with them too. So there are a lot of different parts to that. So there is a perception. So women who don't have children frequently do not have the same pay gap. So they're in the same within industries. So when you look at the overall payback, that pay gap that incorporates a lot of people, but the people have noted that the people talk about the povertization of women, but it's actually the povertization of mothers, in particular, who are being sort of made to bear that burden. Not to say that women don't also get. There's a kind of the issue of the reliability of women workers, and the way that's perceived by employers is that they're perceived, even if they don't have children, to maybe have children. Maybe they'll have children tomorrow, so don't invest too much in them because they might leave. So that's this sort of anxiety that's there around women workers. But the only reason they leave is because there's no support for them, right? So, and that's because who built that system? Not women, right? So so there's this issue of, if you had more perspectives, you would see, you would have more people in the room who were saying, okay, we need to build this. And then, men also get an advantage from that, right? Their children are also getting good care. Their family makes a higher wage. Everybody benefits over the long term. So
Yes, I have known a lot of women that had to leave the workforce, and maybe they were a dual couple working, and one of them had to leave, or they chose to because they're like, daycare costs more than my salary, so I guess I may as well just, like.
That is always a miscalculation, though, because if you leave, you're making less. You're paying your whole salary then, but if you step out and you come back, your salary has gone down, and your capacity to earn over your career is much reduced. So if you can stick it out for those 5-6 years, where you're seeing, oh, I don't like the way this is working out, my salary is going directly to the caregiver salary, and look for the longer term, it's going to pay off in your salary over the long run. But it's hard to see that sometimes,
Right.
when you're just looking at the bills in front of you.
Yes. So according to Forbes, only 8.8% of Fortune 500 companies have women CEOs.
And that's up from 5.
I mean, why is that? We know, especially in our households, we run the show, and we're so great at collaboration and having productive teams, and and executing and getting things done. So why is that? Why are we overlooked on those key positions when it comes to leading an organization? What has your research shown?
Well, people have to get to the point where they're going to be among those who are selected. So there's that whole moving up the ladder process. And then there's again, these issues of perception. And again, who's making the decision, right? So you have to sort of change the environment so that people don't think that they are, working against the pattern by selecting a woman leader. There just has to be, once you have critical mass, then it's going to be more likely that people will be seeing that as a viable option. But again, this issue of women just seeing as not as reliable, will she be there 24 hours a day? Will she be able to focus on that kind of thing? There's this question in people's minds. I don't know, I would love to hear what other people think about what they've perceived as why people are not getting those. I mean, what is your take?
My take?
Yeah.
I can tell you what I did.
Yeah.
I think that it's very important to not get so you can get caught up in your bubble at your job and really not have external network. And it's very important for you to expand out, and whether it's a professional organization, board service, volunteer service community, but it's very important for you to see what else is out there, to learn from others. Sometimes you could get a new position and find out about being a director or a CEO position from somebody within your network who knows about it, but it might mean moving on to another company. But it's going to take a lot longer if you stay where you're at. And that's what this younger generation, I think, has really learned. The millennials, like if we look at the millennials now, when I started pension fund, it's like, okay, I've made it. I'm working for this major oil company. I've had a few expat assignments. And quite honestly, I got comfortable, had that safety net. I know what salary I'm getting in every 2 weeks. I know that I'm going to get a bonus every year. And one of my friends that's here today reminded me, like, hey, Stacy, tap into that hungry 18-year-old self, dig deep and put your fate in your own hands. So there's a lot more that I'm capable of doing. I want to make decisions. And so I decided that I'm going to leave that company and be CEO of my own company. And I'm really loving the freedom. It's a lot harder as far as, to get the company going. And, there's a lot of challenges, but I absolutely every day am enjoying the freedom and all of the new things that I've experienced ever since I left and went out on my own as an entrepreneur, and the people that I've been meeting and the things that I never ever thought that I could do that I have been doing. Like I just spoke on 2 panels at South by Southwest and I received an award, which was, like, wow, pinching myself because it was like on my vision board that one day I would like to go to South by Southwest, like just attend. And I spoke at Rice's Women in Leadership Conference a few weeks ago to talk to women who are, MBAs and in leadership positions, to talk about pivoting and, what it's like working in the workplace and what can we do. So, another thing that's so important is always being a lifelong learner, always refining your skills, continuing to learn and make progress, just not settling and believing in yourself, being your own advocate. And even if your company doesn't want to invest in you and, put money in the budget for you to go take a training course or to get a mentor or an executive coach, do it yourself. Maybe you don't get this new purse or new shoes, but in the long run, that executive coach is going to help you, or, joining this conference is going to help open up some other opportunities, or going back to school and getting your advanced degree or whatever it is that you dream about, which is why I named my company Dream Big, because it is so important for us to never give up on your dreams, no matter how old you are. I mean, if you watch the Oscars, several of the Oscar winners are all like 60 years old. It was amazing. It was like, yes, it doesn't matter how old you are, doesn't matter where you come from, who you are, anything is possible if you believe and you go for your dreams.
And you're building new markets and paying off your investors. So keep that out there too, that people benefit from this, because it's both it's both the idea that you are fulfilling your own dreams, but you're actually also fulfilling the dreams of others and the capacities of your community, right? So you're building your community, you're building out for the group, and there's an interactive dynamic to that I think we all appreciate, because we all want to see models, but then we also want and expect that as those models trickle up, that's the opposite to the usual is the trickle down. Well, we want to see the trickle up, which then becomes a wave, right? Where we're 51% of the population, and it's not just the idea that we need equity for its own sake. We need to be represented because these are just different perspectives on the needs of society and insights into the dynamics of the way things could work better. It's not as though everything is perfect. Just saying. So there's a lot of room for improvement, and having more insights will assist with that.
Yes. So I would like to see if there's any questions from anybody in the room.
So I'd like to know from Professor Gregory, what is the situation in academia? You're the guys and gals that have to teach us how to behave or how to, so what is the situation of the gender gap, salary gap, wage gap in academia?
Well, I'll note that our president, Renu Khator, is one of the best paid leaders in the nation, as are other presidents of Texas universities. So and our previous provost, we had what was called an advance grant from the NSF, which was focused on wage equity and other kinds of equity within the academy. And they did do a wage study and worked on exactly that. So according to them, we're equitable. So.
Well, that may be so. The president, I'm talking of.
No, but I'm saying equitable across the board. They did a study of everybody's salaries. Now, that's faculty. Staff salaries, I think they need to do a lot of work. So I'll say that.
Okay, we had another question here.
All right. So first of all, to your comment about the childcare, actually we have proof from Europe because the gender gap there is only 12% on average for the whole EU because education is, well, actually childcare. So I absolutely love that idea. And also the education part, to continue educating women that those options, but that a lot of women don't know that those opportunities are out there, that those conferences are out there, that there are universities that are on a sliding scale, especially for single moms. And the question I have for both of you is how much of the gap is miscommunication between men and women? Because we communicate in very different levels, different, we understand things differently. So how much of that has an impact on our gap?
Did you want to comment, or you have another or your question?
I can give you one answer to that, which would just be when you say childcare, men hear loss, income loss, outgo. Women hear gain, overall system gain in terms of, it's an immediate, it's a short-term outlay for a long-term profit. So I think there's been a failure to fill in the dot, connect the dots between.
Maybe we need to stop calling it childcare and call it school, because if it's just about how it's like, oh, everybody feels good about sending their kid to school, and we'll pay a lot of money for them to get a good education, So.
I guess I have a suggestion now. So a lot of universities, they do research studies. It may be a good idea for you to bring this up at the university.
We do.
A research study where you compare one company that adds childcare to their, half of their people and the other half they don't, and compare productivity.
Well, that company's going to have trouble because the people in the control group are going to be unhappy. Yeah. Yes, we do have an Institute for Research on Women, Gender, and Sexuality, and it's exactly that kind of study that we do. But childcare, as you say, they do comparisons across nations because policy at the company level is harder to gauge because there are so many other factors that might be impacting the way people participate in the workforce and the overall success of the company. How much of that is dependent on childcare. But if you look at like a community-wide and then compare it with another community that doesn't have that same benefit, then that would be a basis for doing, and there is basis, right? So you definitely see more participation by women in contexts like France, where they do have that. And then the countries that are seen to have, the other factor is the birth rate. So what you see is that in countries that have low support for families, the birth rate goes way down. And those have been Italy, Japan, and Germany, though Germany has changed its policies because of those issues. Because women say, okay, if I have a child, I'm going to be worse off. So so if you're thinking about workforce, that is an issue. You can also just, take away all contraception and birth control of any form, and you think, oh, that's going to raise the population. That is actually false. It's going to cause people to have questions about, oh, should I be pregnant? Because I might, have an ectopic pregnancy and die because my doctor's not allowed to help me. Or they may think, why should I have children if my wages are just going to go down? So if you're thinking about fertility, because that is, part of child care, around the issues around women, it's not just, are they going to take care of their children, but also their children are going to be the workers and consumers of the future. And what kind of, it's not just numbers, it's also what kind of education will they have? What kind of skilled workers will they be able to be? So you have to be thinking big picture around the way you're investing in families, including mothers, fathers, and children, and people who choose not to have children. So, there's big picture issues that you can do global studies around those policies. But lack of care leads to a decline in the birth rate. That has been found.
And
globally.
I wanted to address your second question, which is, single mothers or different, people not having access or not knowing about things. Part of my mission right now at Dream Big is to hold these free, maybe you paid a little bit today, but I hold free seminars to help educate people about investing and about and motivate and inspire them how about self-development and career development and professional growth. So we'll stay in touch. You can follow me and I'll let you know about more events that are coming. I actually have another one. I already mentioned April 19th is the Mendoza Ventures. April 27th, I'm hosting something at She Space called Dreaming Bigger, where we can really put yourself outside of what you think you can do and take it a little step further. And it's going to be unbelievable. And then May 11th, it's Invest in Yourself. So,
Yeah, so Stacey, actually, I want to get back to one of the points you were making earlier and you just made is I think a lot of it goes back to awareness. People don't know what is possible for them. They haven't had those opportunities modeled. They might see something but think that that's not for me. And as a result, they don't know how to go about getting there. So I think a lot of it is around education on what is the path and how to negotiate more effectively for yourself to take the risks in your career that males are typically more conditioned to be comfortable taking, whereas females, oftentimes we find ourselves more reticent and uncomfortable in those situations and how to get comfortable with them. And then I'd love to hear, Dr. Gregory, any thoughts on statistics because the investment side of it is so potent. We find that women don't know how to invest in the same capacity as men typically do. They don't know what opportunities are out there. And how does that then also play into their overall earning capacity? Because it's not just about parity on what a company can pay you, it's on your lifetime earning and how you're now developing and cultivating other income streams. Because when you're only dependent on one, that really actually perpetuates the challenge. Whereas when you can cultivate others, that just breeds so many more opportunities for people. So I'd love to hear if there's the research being done on how people, especially females, can be cultivating those other income streams and what impact that has over their lifetime earning potential.
yes. Well, one example that I wanted to give to you is, probably a year or two ago, I would have not felt comfortable doing something that I did recently, and I'm very proud that I did it, and that's where I invested in I'm a limited partner in Softtech, and before agreeing to become a limited partner, I'm looking at their pitch deck, and I notice, it's all males on the leadership team, and it's all males on their advisory board. And so I'm like, but they want me to invest with them? And I'm like, this doesn't even go with my thesis, So I said, well, I would consider it if you consider me joining your board. And so they're like, you know what? That's a brilliant idea. So I don't think they didn't mean to do it. They just probably overlooked it. But sometimes you have to speak up when you see something. And now, I'm able to be that voice and that representation and to introduce them to other things and, to give a whole nother perspective on their, investment portfolio. So sometimes it's just seeing opportunities, identifying it, and taking action, not just keeping silent, but speaking up.
And to aid that, the next time that kind of opportunity comes up, you might say, put me on your board and 3 other women.
Yes,
because,
and we did put another woman too.
Because you do put yourself at a disadvantage when you're the only woman in the room. And then you're sort of setting yourself up to fail, and then all the expectations are on you. Tell us the women's voice. Whereas if you have a community, a cohort, then you have a different presence in the room. Because you can say something and somebody else will say yes, as opposed to you being the only person in the room saying the new idea and everybody's looking at you like, I never heard of that. But if one person can say yes, that changes the dynamic in the room, and it's critical mass.
Mm-hmm.
Am I allowed to ask a question?
Of course.
I just wanted to say I grew up in an era where very few women worked, but my mother worked. So you know, my sister and I were latchkey kids, and it didn't hurt us. Now, one of the observations I have now is that, you know, if anyone let their kid just go into the house on their own, they'd be, you know, having their kids taken away from them. When did that become a thing, that you couldn't leave your kids alone in a certain structured way over a period of time so that they could, I mean, we self-childcare. Yeah, my sister was older, so she was in charge. It was terrible. But, you know, we worked through it, or, you know, I would walk from school to my mother's office sometimes and then come home with her. There wasn't this necessity to have everything structured down to the, you know, last little minute that your child was always supervised. And I think here in the United States, if you think about compared to Europe, where, you know, people do go out and leave their kids at home alone, and it's not frowned upon to the extent that it is here. Is there somewhere in between where society could structure itself that they have more trust in those kids to be alone?
Generation X. we were the latchkey generation.
Oh, I think I'm a baby boomer.
Yeah, no, you may be, but I think that's what they talk about here in the U.S. when they talk about generations. Generation X was the latchkey generation, where it was like what you were describing. A lot of us went home after school, we took care of ourselves, and I'm wondering if we, the parents, you know, who are Generation X parents, maybe thought, oh, well, maybe we shouldn't have done that. You know, maybe we should do it differently for our kids, and that's on personal.
And I think it's a little bit of smothering goes on with all that too.
And what is the cutoff that you're talking about in terms of age? Kids going home on their own at 6 or at 12, or, I mean, that's a difference.
I got the tram home from school when I was in kindergarten, and walked home, and theoretically my grandmother next door was going to look after us, but we were too much trouble.
Well, yeah, I took the bus and subway to school from the age of 9.
Yeah.
So, because I was going to a magnet school at that point.
Yeah, I mean, it's a different time. We used to be able to leave our doors open, you know, and unlocked, but it's just a different time now. So hard to answer that. Pamela?
Yeah, I had a question in reference to, you know, how much does culture or the culture of like capitalism and this constant like, being productive, right? Men being productive, thus adding that on to women, right? And not including the other responsibilities that women have, caring children, taking care of households and things like that. I think that's the aspect that's challenging, right? Because it then when we see these different companies being owned and operated by mostly men that have power and privilege connected to the policy changes, things like that, it makes it harder, right? Like we can be so aware, we can have so many trainings, we can have so much self-confidence, but at the end of the day, these individuals are still running things, right? So, you know, when I think about the events that you're going to have, like men need to be in that room to be aware of the challenges and issues that women face, but also be part of the solution. Right?
Yes.
And like be self-conscious of what their potential privilege is that they're not recognizing, and thus moving beyond that privilege and saying, let's change some policies at our local level, at our company, in our home even, right? To give women greater opportunities.
So I think that part of that is just valuing care differently and making it something that seems attractive to men to do. Because usually care work is seen as women's work and it's valued at a low rate, even though it is the essential work and everybody wants to be cared for, both in terms of feeling and in terms of service. So if everybody was actually if you did introduce a childcare system and paid people a decent wage for doing childcare, that would be a way of signaling that care was valued literally in the community, right? So then the work of care would take on a different affect or signification in the culture. And if your sister was caring for you or if she wasn't she hadn't learned just the dynamic of care shifted so that too often men feel like women do care work and men define themselves as the opposite of women. So they do everything that...
Whatever you do, women, in the meeting, do not take the notes. Don't do it. Let one of your male colleagues take the notes. You don't have to take the notes. Don't do it anymore.
Let it ChatGPT or AI take it. Yeah,
Yeah.
Ooh, that could be risky.
Okay, speak up. If you see somebody who is echoing and you just said something, let them know, excuse me, but I actually just said that, but maybe I didn't, say it very clearly. Like, did you all not hear me just say that same thing? I mean, sometimes you just have to call them out because they just are accustomed to doing certain behaviors and, yes. Sarah?
Yeah, there's thanks for the information and the conversation today. Just something in me is just lighting up. But there's this idea. I founded an agency 5 years ago, and I had this thought after looking at tech companies and what's worked for them that I want to approach the agency with the full transparency of pay. So from the very top to the bottom, everyone would know exactly what everybody made. And as we took on more projects, as revenue grew, that we could, potentially earn more profit, but the tide rose together. We all rose together. No one got pay increases if the team collectively didn't do well. And it kind of brought up this when I said this idea in other agency groups. This isn't new. You could look, Basecamp does it. I mean, it's published online. There was a lot of pushback, and I was really surprised by how offended people are about knowing what each other make. And it made me think that maybe there's just this stigma against, one, talking about money that is still so prevalent. Because our value is tied so much directly to that financial number and not necessarily to value created or how we interact together or, are we hitting revenue goals? Are we, but anyways, I didn't know if you had any thoughts about that. I felt like this was, I didn't think this was a disruptive idea, but the more that I said it out loud, I found there was a lot of pushback for it. And, I lack experience and just wanted to know in your ladies' experience, like if there was any idea around why that would be, or is that an idea that progressively could work, or that is fundamentally flawed?
So that's I'm forgetting the name, the act that was named after the woman who sued for pay equity. What was it called? We all know what I'm talking about. Anyway, but it was exactly that, because there's a law, and you're not allowed to ask about and so that prevents that. If there's a law against it, there's a sense that there's anxiety around it, right? So if you could find out that your coworker is making twice what you're doing for making the same wage, then that's a basis for your saying, hey, I want to make more, right? So somehow there's a feeling that you want to somebody wants to keep quiet about those. And it may have to do with people's own anxiety about, do people know what I have? But it seems more to be about the employer not wanting people to know so that they can advocate for equity, because they're the ones who are making the policy. It's not really the people with the anxiety who are making the policy.
Mm-hmm. I just want to I actually had that experience, because I found out when I was working for this company that my exact same level person, and I was actually responsible for the largest account, he was making double. And when I brought that up to my boss, he was like, well, he's head of our family, you're not. Literally, the words came out. So I was like, okay, well, I'll start my agency, which I did 12 years ago. But anyway, there's another reason why I was raising my hand. So I see a lot of events that are women-oriented, right? Women do this, women do that, like a lot of events to bring awareness for women. But I don't see any events that are directed for men to bring this awareness to them. So is that something that you see happening in the future, or that you are organizing perhaps with Joint Ventures?
Men are always welcome to it's for all of us. It's for all.
Typically, when you have like a women event, they automatically see it as that's a women event. So why do we even have to put women, right?
So my events are just Dream Big Ventures Investor Series. So actually, there were probably more men at the last event that I held. The majority were males. Today, I have no idea. This was Women in Innovation, so it's a little bit more women here today. But glad to see the men attend who are here. So, and the things that I have, like maybe the table talk luncheon is specific around conversations for women, but that could be a great idea to invite men to the conversation as well.
Or maybe just take the whole women in the beginning. Because I am part of a lot of like Women in Alliance, like events, and you only see women. So we're talking about these issues within us. But we need to
like preaching to the choir.
Yeah.
Well, do you think like a equity grows the pie kind of rubric would be a way of bringing more people to the table so that it wasn't just about...
That's a good title for the next event.
Or perhaps just bringing these topics into hey, this is an economic development meeting.
Right.
We're going to talk about the impact of women leaving the workforce because they have kids. And that's an open conversation where you have men talking about this is a topic that is not only impacting women, but there's also impacting men and the workforce in general, right?
And could you have beside that also discussion of what new markets women develop when their ideas are invested in, and how that also expands the economy, so that you put them next to each other. I think you get a different kind of discussion than because I think it's absolutely true that when you have women leaving the workforce for all these reasons, then there's a negative impact, but that's seen as the status quo. So people don't see it as a loss, they just see it as, okay, this is where we are. But if you can somehow frame it as this is what we're missing, on the other side is if women could stay, then they would be able to do X, Y, these other things. Then we would be moving beyond the status quo in a positive way, as well as all the other, ripple effect benefits.
Yeah, I think we just need to bring this conversation into day-to-day events, right? Like not have only women events where we talk about this.
Yeah.
I'm going to jump in here as we are a little over time, but I do want to thank Stacey Latoyson for being with us today. If we can please give her a round of applause. I'd also like to thank Stacey for inviting Dr. Gregory to today's discussion and conversation. And thank all of you for such a robust conversation and engaging in today's topic around equity and how we advance that as it relates to innovation.